Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're back with episode 6 of To Your Eternity, and man, last episode was a heartbreaker. It was hard to see and even tougher to accept, but it looks like March won't be coming on this journey with us, except through the impressions that she's left on Fushi. Parona's being strong though, Hayase's looking as crazy as ever, and Fushi is on the run. Let's see what happens next, guys. As always, click the first link in the description below to watch the reaction video. Don't forget to stay for the discussion, guys. We've really been getting into it with these episodes. Alright guys, what a crazy episode. I don't even know where to begin. I guess the episode started off a little slowly. Fushi's wandering around. It doesn't seem like Hayase or anyone has, caught up to them, so Parona did her job in making sure that she slowed them down at least. So while wandering around the woods, Fushi meets up with that old lady Pioran, who decides to teach him how to speak and, say words, use language, and I suppose even write, which we didn't really get to see him do much of, but we'll assume that that's, what has happened. And she travels with him to another region called Takunaha, which she says, or seems to suggest, is at war with Yanome, and they fight daily, basically. But that's when things take a turn for, the crazy, the interesting. And this is where all these theories are going to start popping up now. We got two huge characters, or well, not characters, but actors, I suppose. The narrator made an appearance along with this creature. I think the narrator called it a vessel that attacks Fushi. This creature that attacks Fushi, it comes out of the ground sort of like a root, and it seems to be made out of like some sort of plant material, like root or tree, wood. It stabs Fushi immediately and shoots these branches through him and out of his body. I guess that's where we get those scenes from the OP where that happens. The same thing happens. Because I was wondering about that a few episodes ago. What is that going to be? Well, now we know. What this entity does is it steals pieces of the entity. So when it first attacked, it stabbed through Fushi and it stole Fushi from the entity. So now the entity was forced to change into a different form, and it could no longer change into Fushi. The narrator steps in at this point, freezes time, literally freezes time, comes in and starts talking to Fushi and giving it advice and telling it what's going on. Or I suppose it's not Fushi, it's Joan this time. The entity is in the form of Joan. And so the narrator says that this creature is a vessel whose purpose is to weaken Fushi, and that it's a failure of life incapable of becoming an animal. A failure of life incapable of becoming an animal. So it's unable to it can't really become the forms that it steals from Fushi. So it's sort of the antithesis of the entity. All it can do is steal. I made, in the reaction, I made the comparison to it being a scavenger or a virus or a parasite, and sort of the reverse Agent Smith, if you will. But I think the introduction of this creature, this, I don't know what we want to call it, parasite maybe, really just fits perfectly into the dynamics that they've set up so far, because as Fushi grows and gains more experience and levels up, the fact that he's immortal means that once he's gained a certain level of skill, he's basically like, you can't beat him, right? Because once he's learned to really harness the powers of all the consciousnesses, all the impressions that he's absorbed and the forms he's able to transform into, how would you beat him if every time you kill him or defeat him, he just comes right back, right? So this is an interesting way to really introduce a viable threat to Fushi, viable threat to the entity. And this is where things get even more crazy or, interesting. After the entity finally uses the form of March to defeat that creature, the parasite, it's able to reach the core and extract it out of the parasite, where it's holding all of those pieces it stole from the entity. At that point, the parasite dies and the pieces all come back to the entity in sort of a spirit realm-ish transference looking situation. At that point, the narrator has a discussion with Fushi and says that he's his maker and that he and the entity of Fushi, they have a grand objective, and he specifically calls it a grand objective, I think, to give it sort of a above the, material world goals you could have. This is an objective that encompasses everything. And this objective, according to the narrator, is to preserve this world. Now, that's a huge objective. He then goes on to explain whoever sent this entity to this world, and specifically to this world, not like someone in the world, which implies that whoever sent it is not of this world, in order to impede their objective to preserve this world. So what this implies to me is that there's some sort of different plane, different world where higher beings, maybe gods, good and evil, are vying, fighting, conflicting with each other. And that maybe in the future there's going to be some final culmination, some clash, some event in which these two forces, otherworldly forces, are going to collide or appear, fight over this world and its existence. The only reason I say that is because when the narrator ends up leaving, he says to Fushi, "We shall have fun until the coming end." That kind of gave me Ragnarok vibes. But yeah, it's completely wide open for plenty of theories right now. And really just everything that the narrator said, it's just, he's so shrouded in, mystery and literally like darkness and dark robes. You can only see like slight parts of his face. He almost looks like Voldemort or something. It's kind of a creepy looking character. But everything he said is just so interesting. Even the part where he said, "You can't tell what you lost, but you noticed emptiness and discomfort," which, wow, that's almost like such a human concept or feeling, the kind of thing that someone might go to therapy over. But I also like how the narrator called out that Fushi's conscious and intellect is only able to handle a certain amount right now. And then he gives him the advice that creature that he sees is the enemy, and he has to fight to win back what he's lost. Just throwing these, impressions and directions and guidance onto Fushi, onto the entity to act. And so now we know that the entity was created with some sort of underlying guiding principles or goals or objectives or, grand objective laid out before it. Although it is going out in the world on its own to learn and to gather stimulation, clearly the narrator is going to have some large part in guiding, maybe not always forcing, but making sure he doesn't go off track, helping him out whenever he gets, into trouble like we've just seen. That's going to be another huge influence in what the entity ends up developing into. It's interesting. I wonder if at some point there's going to be some sort of at a certain level of growth in Fushi, and then the narrator comes and says, okay, it's time. We got to be focusing on our grand objective. And Fushi has reached that sort of adolescent, teenage, rebellious phase and says, you know what? I've been going out in the world and doing all these new sorts of things that I've been getting into, and I don't know if I want to do this whole grand objective thing. What if I want to do something else? That might be an interesting little, touch to little character arc to throw in there. Like I said in the reaction, I was a little worried that the pacing is going pretty slow this episode. It might just be a little filler, like fill in the gap episode. But no, we got right into it after the halfway mark. The second half of this episode was crazy. There's so much we could talk about. We could talk about how that old lady's kind of weird, and this little boy with the tiki, the mask looking thing who's also in the OP, how is he gonna fit in? We just met him at the end of this episode. The fact that March's green eyes are weird. It's a weird vibe because she was such a explicitly drawn character before in this show, where she would have the most touching expressions, and her eyes and her face and everything would just be so articulated. And now she's, as the entity when he transforms into March, he doesn't really have that look, and it's weird. You can, especially the eyes, the green eyes, but even just the rest of the face, it's clearly just so not March, you know what I mean? We also got that little explanation where after Fushi's able to talk, he explains on that boat to the old lady Pioran. He wants to learn and he wants to grow, and to grow is to learn, which is another little theme that we could get into. But that clearly comes from March, and that's one of March's impressions on Fushi, and how, like we discussed in last episode's discussion, all these impressions are going to shape which direction he chooses to go in. Is that him gathering these impressions and deciding, what, I like March's impressions, I'm going to go with that? Or is that sort of, these are the impressions I got and I'm going this way because of the impressions? Or is it a free will versus I am a product of my environment and my stimulation? This theme is constantly going to be brought up. I can't wait to see where they're going to take this. And, next episode, we're going to be introduced to new characters. I have no doubt that the pacing is going to be right, and within a couple episodes we're going to be flying through this new little mini character arc, so I can't wait for that. These discussions have honestly been really enjoyable for me, and everything to do with this series have just been, I've been having a blast, and to get to share it with you guys on a community like YouTube is, it's really just great. And I appreciate every one of you guys who watches the video, whether it be the reactions or the discussions, anyone who drops a comment or like, it helps out the channel a lot. And I'm really just, thankful that you guys are here to go through this ride with me. But other than that, guys, I'm looking forward to seeing you all for the next discussion video. Take care.